Even Lenin, who supposedly was the dictator of communism in Russia, he said sometimes you turn the wheel, but the car doesn't go that way. So I think he began to realize that there are forces in play on this planet that hold much greater power than we even know about. And if we don't even know about it, then how can we talk about it? And if we can't talk about it, then we can't do anything about it, and that creates a real problem. But Jamie, I think you're thinking in the right direction, and all I can say is just keep studying.
Yep, just like the old saying, money talks. So thank you for taking my call, and
Yep. Well, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. I've got a question here online from Bump Mush. Okay. Says, have you ever explored remote viewing yourself? And yes, I have. In fact, that was quite an eye opener for me, because when I first heard the story about the U.S. Army was using remote viewing to spy on the Soviets and the other potential enemies, I jumped all over that story, not because I thought remote viewing worked, but because I thought, what a waste of government money. This is going to be a great story, because here they are just frittering away the taxpayers' money. But then I found out, after digging into it and after being schooled in it myself and even being tested in it, it really works. And I will tell you about my personal experience the first time I tried remote viewing right after this break. So everybody hold on to your keyboards and hold on to your telephones and hang in there, and we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to continue this view from Mars. Howdy, we're back here, View from Mars on Epic Voyages. Speaking of, before I forget about it, anybody that's around the Dallas-Fort Worth area, on August the 28th, I will be making a presentation to the Epic meeting here. You go to the Epic website, you'll find all the details, directions, everything else. And I don't think you want to miss this one. I'm only going to talk about the hidden history of the world and try to cover that in a little more than an hour or so. That's kind of like saying, well, hey, take a minute and tell me everything you know. Okay. And I want to mention also, once again, the call-in number is 888-919-2355. And I'm almost dead certain that is a toll-free number. So don't hesitate. As Chase and I were talking about, we may have a wallflower contest here to see who's the shyest person. But that's going to be a little difficult to judge, I guess, because the shyest person probably won't call in. But let's work on it. Let's all just stick our chin out and our best foot out, and we're going to go. As I mentioned before we took the break, I will tell you briefly my first experiment with remote viewing. And for those of you who don't know what remote viewing is, that is seeing, visualizing people, places, things at a distance without using the normal five senses. In other words, it's a psychic ability. And I know there's probably a few of you out there going, what? Because that's exactly the way I felt when I first heard about it. I thought, this has got to be a waste of the taxpayers' money, so I'm going to dig into this story. Okay, what you do is you get in a very meditative state, and you allow your inner self to connect with the universal energy grid. And then you can, if you allow yourself to, and if you're sensitive to it, you can pick up the very subtle and slight input that will come. I'm sure that all of y'all at one time or another have had the experience of thinking, hey, I think my mom's going to call. And then a few minutes later, or an hour later, the phone rings and it's your mom. We all have this ability. In fact, that was determined at research that was done at Stanford Research Institute out in California. They found out some amazing things, that we all have this capability and that it's not limited by time or space. You can remote view in the past, you can remote view in the future. So anyway, when I first heard about it, though, I was pretty skeptical. In fact, I was highly skeptical. And so I was slated to fly out to Albuquerque and meet some of the guys that had been in the Army's remote viewing unit, and they were trying to start up a private business. And I was told I was going out to meet with them at their headquarters. So I'm thinking in terms of an office building or whatever. And so I had a leg up on this whole thing because back as a newspaper reporter, I had done a story on transcendental meditation. And in the course of preparing for that story, they had actually taken me through a course, and I'd learned how to sit down and relax and kind of clear my mind and get in a meditative state. So I did that because that's one of the first key steps in remote viewing. And then I said, okay, I want to know what this headquarters is going to look like. Well, I got a very definite impression of not a clear picture, okay? If you sit down and close your eyes and you've got a very clear picture of, say, a South Sea island with a grass hut and seagulls going by and the waves laughing on the white shore, that's daydreaming, okay? This is a very subtle signal, but I got a very distinct impression of this one-story strip shopping center type place with a kind of earthy, dark earth tone, but the corners of the building were raised somewhat, and there was something jutting out. And this is where I made my first mistake. I found out later this is called analytic overlay. It's when you begin to try to consciously analyzing the information that you're getting, and that's when you'll start making mistakes. In other words, if you see something tall and pointed and filled with people, you might say, oh, it's a rocket ship. And then, no, actually, it's the Washington Monument. So you have to be careful of analytic overlay. So I thought, well, since it's in Albuquerque, it was probably Southwestern architecture, you know, with the wooden poles sticking out of the top of the building. But then I got also a very distinct impression of the floor plan, and I sketched it out, complete to writing down entrance, reception area, large conference room, hallway, offices. And so I took this with me out to my visit in Albuquerque. When I got out there, I realized that I probably wasn't worth a darn because their office turned out to be a fellow's home, and it was a ranch-style home. It was nothing like what I had seen. So I kind of tossed my drawings over to him. I said, well, I guess I'm not any good. Well, a year later, I went back, and it seems that in an intervening year, they had not had the success they wanted with trying to hire their services to companies, but they had had some success in training people to do remote viewing, and so they had leased space in a brand new office building. They drove me to this office building, and when I pulled in the parking lot, I took one look, and I realized that's what I had been seeing because it was a one-level strip shopping center type place, and the corners were raised, but instead of wooden poles sticking out, it was lions' heads. But there it was, something jutting out of the top of the raised corner. And then they handed me the official floor plan from this office complex, and I looked at it and I was literally blown away because it was 100% exactly what I had drawn down to the writing. They had labeled entrance, reception area, large conference room, and in fact, I am now of the opinion that I probably did not remote view the actual insides of the building. I think I remote viewed the floor plan because my drawing was absolutely 100% what this floor plan was. And the kicker to the whole story is that when I did the drawing and did the remote viewing, this building had not been completed yet. It hadn't even been built. So apparently I had remote viewed a little bit into the future. So that pretty well set me back on my heels. And that's when I got serious about researching the history and the science behind remote viewing. And for those of you who might be interested in that, then all of that is together in my book, Sci-Spies, P-S-I, Spies, Psychic Spies, Sci-Spies. I think it's the true story of America's psychic warfare program, and it's published by New Page Books, and I would encourage you to get it. They did a very good job, and I still find it a absolutely fascinating subject. And before I get to any more questions, I already see somebody asking, do they still do remote viewing in the U.S. government? And my answer is yes and no. If you ask them, do you have a group of people that are hired by the government to do remote viewing, they're going to say no. And that's probably the truth. But there are people, remote viewers, who have been trained in remote viewing who operate within various units within the government. As I understand it, Special Forces, Rangers, the Delta Force, the Navy SEALs, they'll always have a remote viewer along with them. Because even if they're not 100%, any unit commander would love to have somebody who can tell him what might be going on over the next hill. So yeah, they're still using it, although they don't like to admit to that. Well, let's see where we are now. The Avenger wants to know what I think about the alleged Jackie O tapes and her implication of LBJ and JFK's elimination. It wasn't elimination, and it wasn't an assassination. It was an execution. And they executed Kennedy for the same reason that we execute criminals, to serve as a deterrent to prevent anyone from following in his footsteps. And what was his footsteps? Well, he was trying to curtail the power of the U.S. corporations. He was trying to curtail the power of the intelligence community. He threatened to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces. He was trying to curtail the power of the FBI, and he was trying to curtail the power of the military-industrial complex, and in fact had set us on a course for disengagement in Vietnam. So it was that they had to stop him. And so with the coup of 1963, this country's pretty well gone down the hill. So when Jackie O, what they're talking about here is that when Jackie Onassis passed away, it was actually mentioned in the mainstream mass media that she had left behind either a manuscript or a lot of notes or some writings, but that she said they were not to be made public until after the death of all her children, which tells me, should tell you, that she had a concern over the safety of her family. Does that sound familiar? Let's think back. Wasn't it H. Ross Perot who was starting to make a third-party run for the presidency and had a groundswell of public support? And then all of a sudden he just dropped out. And then when he finally came back around again, he said, I was fearful for the safety of my family. Well, wait a minute. He was a presidential candidate. Doesn't that get him some protection from the FBI and the CIA and the U.S. military? So who was he afraid of? And I submit, them, okay? And Jackie O knew the same thing. So when she implicates LBJ, let's face it, Jackie was in a position to find out what's going on. And if she wasn't, then her soon-to-be husband, Aristotle Onassis, who was an arch enemy of the CIA, he was certainly in a position to find out what was going on. Now, I'm going to tell you flat out, folks, and I'll say it again. LBJ is guilty in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Now, can I prove that he ordered it or orchestrated it? No. But what I can prove, and is beyond any reasonable shadow of a doubt, is that Lyndon Baines Johnson took actions that blocked any meaningful investigation of Kennedy's assassination, including destruction of evidence when he destroyed and had the presidential limousine cleaned in Dallas and then shipped to Ford and then stripped down and then rebuilt before there was any forensics investigation done. That's destruction of evidence. That makes him an accessory after the fact under our legal system. And I know in Texas, we've executed accessories after the fact in murder cases where the evidence clearly shows they didn't pull the trigger, but they were there, they knew about it, and they did not turn anybody in. In fact, they tried to hide the murder weapon or tried to stall the investigation. And under our legal system, that makes them as guilty as the person that pulls the trigger. So as an accessory after the fact, Lyndon Baines Johnson is guilty. Period. End of story. And we're winding down here, so let's get on here. And I think Jackie O knew this. And so I think that she also knew that there was a lot of political power behind Johnson and that it was dangerous to try to come out and say anything. And so that's why she stipulated that none of her thoughts were to come out until after the death of her children. But I understand Caroline Kennedy has relented and said, well, okay, and they're allowing some of this stuff to come out now. Of course, Johnson and Lady Bird are both dead now. So I guess, once they're dead, then it's okay to talk about it. And this is one of my pet peeves, by the way, folks, is that I'm tired of waiting 50 years to find out what really happened. We're still finding out things that truly happened in World War II that we didn't know at the time or were denied. And of course, here we are just 10 years after 9/11, and we're still being sold a bill of goods about that. I don't want to wait 50 years to find out what happened. I want to find out what happened now so that some action can be taken and so justice can be served. And I'm sorry if that makes me sound like some kind of weirdo, but I'm just enough of a old Texas boy that and have that cowboy spirit. I think right's right and wrong's wrong, and if somebody commits wrong, I think there needs to be justice done to it. And I don't think I'm being unpatriotic. In fact, I'm only following what I myself heard President George W. Bush say a day or so after 9/11. He said, essentially, we must not rest until we find out who's responsible for this crime and see that they're punished. So I'm just trying to do what he advocated. And sorry about that. But we're now finding out the truth. Back in the 60s and 70s, I was trying to tell people there was a big conspiracy to kill Kennedy, and I was the nut and the conspiracy theorist. And today, almost everybody agrees with me. And now there's things being accepted as just self-evident truth, such as Jack Ruby is connected to organized crime, which for 20 years or more, they say, oh, that's not right. That's not. Where do you get that? You're making that stuff up. That can't be good. That's not true. You're just a conspiracy theorist. So anyway, sorry to get on my soapbox, but I just get irritated when it takes 50 years for truth to come out. But Mush also wants to know about the party celebration the night before the Kennedy assassination. Well, I think what he's referring to is the fact that the Secret Service agents that were assigned to protect Kennedy were all drinking first at the Fort Worth Press Club, which I'm a former president of, and at Pat Kirkwood's Cellar Club in Fort Worth. And in fact, the Secret Service agents at the Texas Hotel there in Fort Worth that were supposed to be standing guard for Kennedy, they sneaked off to get a drink and left a couple of Fort Worth firemen to protect the President of the United States. That's a fact. How does that grab you? And at the Cellar Club, I know people who, I've been in the Cellar Club, and in fact, I got to be friends with Pat Kirkwood, who the cops all told me was the Jack Ruby of Fort Worth. And of course, he told the Warren Commission that they couldn't have been drinking because he didn't have a liquor license. He was an after-hours club. Everybody would go there after, the movies and your date, or you went to party, and then you go to the cellar. And it's interesting because the cellar started off in the basement. It wasn't a cellar, but then fairly quickly he moved. And I always thought it was funny because they called it the cellar, but you had to climb this huge flight of stairs and go up to the second floor to get to the cellar. But I do know people who were there, news people, and they said that the Secret Service, they were not partying, okay? A party going on. They were sitting over by themselves drinking heavily until like 5 in the morning. And they were drinking because even though Pat Kirkwood and others said, well, they didn't have a liquor license, they couldn't have been drinking, they could and they did because, let me tell you folks, I was a young kid, but I had been working part-time at the Star-Telegram, knew some of the reporters, and I went in there and I got liquor drinks, okay? Because if you were anybody, a cop or a city or county official, then Pat Kirkwood was trying to curry favor with you, you got a mixed drink, and it was a pretty stiff one, too. So once they kicked the Secret Service agents out of the press club because it was after hours, and they were afraid they were going to lose their liquor license, they called up Pat Kirkwood and said, can we send these Secret Service agents over to you? And he said, oh, yeah, send them on over. So he took care of them, and they drank till 5 in the morning. And that's why the next day in Dallas, when the shots started going off, if you'll notice, there was only one Secret Service agent that actually reacted quickly, and that was Clint Hill, who jumped off the follow-up car, rushed up, and jumped on the back of the presidential limousine. Now, you ready for this? Clint Hill was originally not even supposed to be on that protection detail. And he was not assigned to President Kennedy. He was assigned to Jackie Kennedy. And at the last minute, she said, oh, I really like Clint Hill. I want him along. So at the last minute, they included Clint Hill in on the Secret Service protection unit there in Dallas. And he was the only one that reacted when the shots went off. Just another little tidbit of information for all you conspiracy fans. And it looks like that we're about to run out of time here. So let me give you the number so you can write it down for next time. It's 888-919-2355. This is your permanent, temporary, floating host, Jim Mars, giving you the view from Mars here on this balmy Monday night. I say balmy because it only hit about 95 today here. But listen, after 44 days of triple-digit heat, 95 seemed pretty balmy. So I thank everyone for participating. And be sure and come catch my talk on the 28th. You can get the details at the Epic Voyages website. Be sure and check out my new website. It's coming up. I don't think it's quite there yet. Write it down, stick it in your pocket, and about a week from now, pull it out and then go check it out. But jimmars.com, JIMMARRS.com. Check it out. I've got a brand new website coming out. It's got all the bells and whistles and floating things and music and animation and, oh, man, lots of good stuff. And I always remember, buy my books. Good night. Adios.
Thank you for being with us tonight. Please join us again next Monday evening for Extraordinary Phenomena Investigations Council's Epic Voyages. I'm Roger Peacock for Epic. Until next time.